Hello, and welcome to the DC Overlord channel. I'm the DC Overlord, and today we are going to be talking about the DCU and kind of the things that I hope that, kind of my wish list for the DCU. What I hope it accomplishes, the things that I hope that it does. This is not what I think it will do, this is what I hope will happen. Because now that we're kind of in the back half, we pretty much are done with the DCEU, except for like Blue Beetle and Aquaman 2. There's no things left, and even then they're gonna be kind of like in a new sort of timeline now, because they're post Flashpoint, post Flash, so it's probably gonna be a little bit different. And I kind of just want to talk about the DCU and what's next for DC as a company. What does it need to accomplish in order to be successful? I think number one, the casting, very important. Everyone in the main cast should be recasted. The only people that I will allow to stay is like John Cena, Viola Davis, and maybe Margot Robbie. Like, I can understand why they would stay. But everybody else, I feel like needs to be recasted. Including Gal, and Ezra, and Jason. Like, it wouldn't make sense to keep them around when you're trying to bring about a new vision. Like, a new tone. Because even if they are different in the movie, people will always compare them to the Snyderverse if they are included into the DCEU. So I feel like in order to properly reset the universe, you need to replace those characters. You can't have the same Justice League or partly the same Justice League. I do believe that Gal is out as Wonder Woman. I do believe that Jason is out as Aquaman, and that Ezra will be out as the Flash. Now, I think some of that is going to be addressed later on. I don't think it's necessarily going to be revealed this year. I think it's just going to be kind of a waiting game, and we'll find out in 2025, really. For me, I really hope the DCU takes its time in creating each project, and that each project stands on its own just as much as it feels part of the universe. I think if you make it do too much, it's going to feel like too much. But if you make it connected while still doing individual stories, I think it'll be really well, because you don't necessarily have to watch everything in order to enjoy it, but you can, and you will enjoy it more. I think that's kind of the route that you need to go in, so you don't have to rely on every project doing well. Let's say, the Authority. Let's say the Authority, it doesn't do as well, but you still have that kind of base to go off of to do, like, the Authority versus Superman. And you can do that because you don't require everyone to see every single movie, but the ones that are really good will be loved by everyone, because you'll have those people coming to the theaters and really enjoying the movies. I don't think it has to be everything is connected, everything is one story. Because while that is kind of important to have, it's important to have consistency and continuity, but it needs to be in a way where you're not forced to watch a show that you don't want to watch. You're not forced to watch a movie you don't care about. But you feel compelled to, or you feel like it will better your experience. Because for me, I think the reason why the MCU is starting to fail is because it for a while, up until phase 3 or 4, you really did have to watch everything in order to understand the general story for Infinity War and Endgame and even after that, right? And that's fine, But I think in order to really have people love your films, it can't just be like one cohesive story. The films themselves, the individual films themselves, have to have that quality as well. Right? For example, like Ant-Man and Quantumanium, right? People don't really care about the Ant-Man story, but I think in order to have people watch it, you have to make the movie stand out on its own as something people really want to watch. It kind of, like, for example, people love Guardians of the Galaxy 3 because it stands on its own. It does include continuity from the previous movies, but it very much is like a standalone film. Like, you could watch it as a standalone film, like the series, like the trilogy. You could watch like 1, 2, 3, and still understand the full context of it. Like for example, I think that if you have like Superman Legacy should be kind of a building block, right, for the general DCU. But the main focus should still be Superman and his story. The same thing kind of goes with everybody else, where you can have like a Lantern show. Yes, you can have like Superman show up or something, but it should still be focused on the Lanterns. It shouldn't be like, oh, here's a guest star, oh, they're gonna be doing this in order to interact with this character. Like, at best, it should just be like a conversation or something. Like, I think, as much as people have the criticisms for how the Flash was handled, but I think one of the great things about the Flash is that in the beginning it feels like they're an actual Justice League, like they're communicating with each other, they're working with each other, but they're not all present at the same time. And I think that's kind of important in order for the solo movies to still feel like solo movies, but they are still part of the greater universe. I think that's kind of the vibe that you want to go for, where it feels like the universe is there, like that you still have like the greater universe, but maybe it's more focused on like Batman and his family, and maybe it's more focused on the Green Lantern Corps or something. And I also think that it's important to kind of balance the budget a little bit, not go for too expensive, but be reasonable. For example, I do think that most of the movies can run on like a 150 to 200 million budget. Like, I don't think anyone really needs more than 200 million to make a movie, because you can balance that and put it towards like other, like you can find ways to make projects cheaper. And I definitely think that, things that are more expensive, right, it's a lot more riskier if it's going to profit. If you play it safe and say put a hard line 150 per film, then you have a lot better chance of profiting, because like, after marketing and everything boosts a little bit, you'll be at that 200 million level, and the 200 million is very easy to crack open, right? It's very easy to make like 200 million in the box office. Like, it's very common for that to happen. And I think you can rely on that, but you don't want to just break even, you want to make more than that. So being able to kind of make your budget reasonable, not too cheap, but reasonable, not too cutting corners, but using more, maybe using more practical effects, or maybe even using CGI to kind of balance the two in between. Like, I definitely think the DCU should be like a balance of practical and CGI. Some of it should be CGI, some of it should be practical. I think you can absolutely have that practicality when making these films, because a lot of these DCU things can be made with practical effects. For example, Swamp Thing, I think, should be like 50% practical, 50% CGI. Like, you should like have like the costume and everything, but you should have a lot of it like use CGI to enhance, not necessarily create from scratch. I think James Gunn is very good at doing that. It's more so like the other directors. And the other thing is writing. writing for the DCU is imperative. Not just to write a good script, but to have references to the comics that exist. I think a lot of the DCEU didn't really use the comics that are right there for them. Or if they did use the comics, it was the very basic, very common story to be told. But there's a lot of comics out there, and there's a lot of great comics that would be very interesting to adapt if you stay within that kind of realm. Like, yes, you can make changes, but not so drastic that they change the entire plot of the DC universe. Like, for example, Hush should always be Tommy Elliott. You can change the story so that it works with the universe, but if Hush isn't Tommy Elliott, it doesn't really make any sense. You can't just make him the Riddler. It doesn't make sense. And so you kind of take it like that, where it's like, yes, you can make changes. Yes, you can kind of adapt as you go, but you need to be reasonable with it. You can't just have Superman killing everybody. Superman should not want to kill. This is how you make your characters feel unique and feel special, because while Superman doesn't kill, Apollo does. And then you see those foils between each other. They're very similar in powers, but they're very different as characters, and you show that through characterization, and you enhance that story even more. So I think that really having each character be distinct, have their own personalities, have their own storylines, deal with their own villains. Like, I know it's very popular right now to share villains. Like, for example, Killer Frost has now very much become the Flash villain. Or, like, Darkseid has become Superman's villain, even though it's more like he's the Justice League villain. Killer Frost is Firestorm's villain. But people, use these villains and they change who's who. But I think in the DCU, you don't need to do that, right? Because each character has their own set of villains that work for them for a very specific reason. That's why I don't think that Deathstroke should be the choice for a Batman villain. I think it should definitely be Nightwing to fight with Deathstroke. Because yes, Deathstroke can work as a Batman villain. However, Batman has so many villains that can be used that you can find a better solution other than using somebody else's villain to be that villain. Like, you can use Scarface. Scarface is an amazing villain. Like, the ventriloquist. Very amazing and so underrated, but you can still use them, right? You can use, like, the Scarecrow, for example. There's so many villains you can use that there's no excuse to do this, like, exchanging villains type of thing. You could argue, yeah, it's like a better story, but Batman also already has villains that are swordsmen. It's not Deathstroke. You could use, like, Lady Shiva, for example. Or you could use the Al Ghuls. I mean, they're right there, right? And there's other villains to be used as well. For example, like, Lady Shiva would make sense because you're dealing with Damian Wayne, who is the son of Talia al Ghul. You can introduce Lady Shiva through that story. I think having an understanding of the characters and who their villains are is an important thing because it's what makes their stories unique. If I am reading a Batman comic, I don't expect a Superman villain to show up out of nowhere, unless it's a crossover. That's different. But your solo movies shouldn't really be crossovers. Like, yes, you can have characters appear, but it shouldn't really be focused on the crossover aspect. It should be focused on the character. And if you have character stories, I think that's where you get really compelling stories, really compelling movies. And if they feel unique, you won't have to deal with fatigue, right? If you're dealing with a sci-fi movie, it should feel like a sci-fi movie. If you're dealing with a fantasy movie, it should feel like a fantasy movie. like for example, Batman should be more like a mystery or like a detective thriller. Superman could be more action packed, but like Wonder Woman would be more like warrior esque. It should, like, each genre should be different per movie because they are different stories, they are different characters, they deal with different types of conflict. Right? You should understand how to use those characters so that they feel distinct. That is really my wish for the DCU. There's a lot of characters I would love to see, and I think James Gunn could very well use them, as he loves using obscure characters. There's a very long list of people that I would include, even though the general public don't really know about them. Because they're great characters, and the general audience can learn to love them. And the general audience doesn't care whether or not they come from the comics or not. So it's like, why would they care if they don't know who this person is? Like, as long as you have a good trailer to support it, people are going to want to see it. Like, I'm sure Blue Beetle is going to do well, because it's unique. Like, it's different from other films. It's like, it's just different. I don't think everything has to be connected to each other, and I don't even think everything has to be like A-list characters. Like, yes, you include Superman, yes, you include Batman, but you can also include Green Arrow and Question and other characters that people don't really know about, and people will learn to love. The thing about the thing about the MCU is that they didn't use popular characters. Iron Man was probably the most popular character they could have used, other than like the X-Men and stuff like that. But there's a lot of characters that they use that people don't really know. People don't really know them because they're not really big comic book characters. The whole point was that they were using characters that nobody really knew about. And yet they built a whole universe based on them. So it's like, if Marvel can do that, DC can absolutely do that, and they have far better characters than Marvel. I think the real thing is to really use the comic books that these stories are based on, because that is going to be your grounding for developing a story that DC fans can appreciate, but also the general audience can appreciate. There are so many great comics. There are also some bad ones as well. So it really is about kind of picking the right ones to use. And staying true to the characters' stories and being able to make each character feel unique. Not just go for star power. Go for more of like what feels like that character. Like, I don't care who plays him, as long as they can do the job, as long as they can portray the character like they are supposed to be. I think more so than seeing specific characters, I just really want them to love each character that they actually use, right? Because if they love people like Swamp Thing and they love people like Brewster Gold, they're going to love people like Superman and Wonder Woman, and it's going to be beneficial for us because we'll be able to see more of our characters that we want to see, and they'll be actually treated like those characters should be. Instead of Titans, who butchers half of their characters, and I'm not saying they can't change anything. Yeah, you can change some things if it enhances the story, but there are some things that don't need to be changed, and it's kind of taking like the lazy way out. Like, for example, I don't think race should really change for the major characters. Like, there are some characters where I'm like, fine, okay, whatever. But it's like, if you're gonna change everyone, there's no point in doing that, because there's always a character that would be better suited for that role if you want to have the diversity, right? Everyone has a hero. Everyone has a character that you can use instead of just race swapping. I know that might be kind of controversial, but it's true. Especially if you look at the DC lineup, there's a lot of great characters that you can use. For example, if you want a black character, you can easily look at any of the milestone characters, Static Shock, Black Lightning. There's a lot of them that you can use instead of doing a Black Superman, for example. Now there is a Black Superman character that you can use, there's Steel, and there's Val-Zod. And you need to understand who those characters are, and that they're not just Black Superman, right? They have their own morals, they have their own storylines, they have their own character. They're different characters. That's something to realize. Yes, you can use Robins, but understand why each is different, right? Dick is very different from Tim. Tim is very different from Jason. Jason is very different from Damian. Damian is very different from Stephanie. It's there's a reason why there's a lot of them, and there's also a reason why people love specific versions of them, because they have those unique qualities, and in order to have that love, you need to make them unique, right? You can have 5 Robins on the screen as long as they feel like different characters. And that's the thing. And yes, you should use obscure characters, because that's the beauty of the DC universe. There's a lot of characters you can use that are just as lovable, but that is just as good, and they just don't get enough attention with stories. For example, Donna Troy is a very lovable character. She's not used a lot in media, and she deserves to be used in media. Or, for example, Scarface. Scarface, not too well known, but can very well be used in film. Why not? You can look at the more obscure villains, and you can absolutely make them work. You just have to kind of figure out how. For example, The Flash has so many villains that often don't get used. You have Mirror Master, you have Trickster, you have Boomerang. You have a lot of villains. People just don't know how to use them in order to tell a good story, right? It's not just speedsters that are the villains to The Flash. In fact, sometimes it's the opposite of that. And you need to show that in order to tell a really good story. And so I think the people that should be handling these characters should really understand each character and who they are working with. Because if you understand that, you'll be able to tell really great stories. You'll be able to show how great this could really be. And I think if you get great writers, you can do just that. It just depends on the writers that you get. Right? A lot of these projects are going to rely on good writing. Not so much directing, but yeah, directing is important, but really it's the writing that is going to make the difference, and also having good visual effects, and also having good actors. Casting for the role, not the actor, not the face. And I think that will be done, and I really hope so. And it'll be interesting to see where this all goes. It'll be interesting to see if this actually lasts. I hope it does, because I would really love it too. And I think everyone would really appreciate if we got some really good DC movies for once in our lives. I think it's possible if you have the right team. But that's me. That's what I have to say for today. But comment down below. What do you guys want to see in the DCU? Are there any specifics or just generalizations that you really want the DCU to focus on? What do you think? Comment down below. Subscribe for more content like this. And I'll see you next time. Bye.